I can speak now to the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Good morning, Ms Cooper. I think you're at home before going to Remembrance service. Why do you think...
That's right, we have a Remembrance service in Castleford this morning that I'll be joining shortly.
Why do you think that this moment still feels so relevant today, more than 100 years on from the end of World War I?
I think Remembrance is about communities coming together, showing respect for each other, but particularly to commemorate those who we lost, those who gave their lives to keep us all safe through generations, and to remember them, to remember their families, to pay tribute to our armed forces, but all those who served to keep us safe and to stand up for the values of our democracy, the values of our freedom.
We saw a very different spirit in some parts of London yesterday. Were you, as the Shadow Home Secretary, content with the way the Metropolitan Police handled it?
Well, I think for Remembrance Weekend, the Armistice Day yesterday, we did want to see everybody coming together. And we saw some appalling scenes in the capital, both the far-right groups, the thuggish violence and attacks towards police officers. We also saw some deeply appalling cases of anti-Semitism that are still being investigated now. But I want to thank the police for the work that they did to make sure that Armistice events weren't disrupted. They said that's what they would do. That is exactly what they did. And they did have to endure these attacks on them, as well as the considerable policing challenges in the capital. And I am very concerned that the government made it harder for the police to do their jobs, including both in inflaming tensions, but also undermining confidence and respect in the police exactly when both the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister needed to be backing the police. And I really think they should also be thanking the police for the work they did in very difficult circumstances.
The Prime Minister has issued a statement this morning. Were you surprised that there were no words of thanks for the police in his statement?
To be honest, I was just shocked that there wasn't a word of thanks for the police in the statement. We saw police under attack, having missiles thrown at them and having to deal with people who were trying to climb over fences, climbing onto walls to try and get to the cenotaph. The police made sure that they didn't, and we should thank them for that. And this comes when the Home Secretary launched this really appalling and unprecedented attack on the police, on both their operational independence and also on their impartiality. I've never seen any Home Secretary do what Suella Braverman did, and there's good reason for that. The events that we saw yesterday around the Armistice, those are the reasons why no Home Secretary has ever done anything like this before, and it was irresponsible. So I think especially in that context, it's really important for the Prime Minister to thank the police for what they've done.
I want to come back to the matter of the Home Secretary in a moment, but you yourself aspire to be Home Secretary. And let's deal with the central point that she made. The march was largely peaceful. As we've been saying, the police essentially managed it. But were you Home Secretary, had rather that this march did not take place this weekend?
So I think what we want is for communities to be able to come together. Whether marches take place is an operational matter for the police, and it's right that we should support the police in making that operational decision.
I want to come back to the operational point, but politically,
decided by politicians. But there is a really important
given this weekend,
about
would you rather had not seen that march take place this weekend?
Well, we did support the police in their operational decisions. They did make requests for the march to be postponed, but ultimately it is really important that these are operational decisions for the police. But I think one of the important issues is some of the individual cases that we've seen around anti-Semitism. It's extremely important that action is taken on hate crime, that it feels the full force of the law. And I am also calling for stronger action against both anti-Semitism anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, both of which we've seen rise in recent weeks. And at the moment, the government has downgraded some of the monitoring of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. I don't think that is the right approach. And they have failed to renew the hate crime action plan. There's a series of things we think they should do, including looking again at some of the law and some of the reports that have been made, because we must have much stronger action on anti-Semitism, as we saw some of the cases yesterday, but also on Islamophobia as well.
Well, as you say, there were placards, there were chants, there was the really rather ugly scene of someone carrying a swastika on one part of the march yesterday. And there is law that exists that could have led to arrest. Do you think that the police actually did their job yesterday on dealing with the extremist element of the pro-Palestinian march?
So again, I'm not going to second-guess the police on individual operational decisions. As we know, some of those cases are still being investigated. The police do follow-up work and further arrests, as we've seen when this has happened. So they are obviously continuing that work, and it's right that they should do so, because we need any case of anti-Semitic hate crime or intimidation to face the full force of the law. One of the points that the police made was that they would have preferred to have additional officers to be monitoring for cases around the anti-Semitic hate crime. But of course, they also had to deal with the far-right groups that were trying to get close to the cenotaph as well.
But you would not be directing the police, essentially, whether it's operational or not, you would not be making clear that you would want to see someone who is carrying a swastika on that march at least investigated directly. You wouldn't have anything to say about that.
Look, those are appalling cases. I've seen some absolutely appalling cases there of anti-Semitism where they need to face the full force of the law. So there needs to be investigations. We want to see where there are serious cases around anti-Semitic hate crime. We need to see arrests made. We need to see proper action and cases taken through the courts. So let's be absolutely clear in that there has to be zero tolerance of anti-Semitic hate crime in our country, and we should be very strong about that. But I think it's also important to recognise that we have to support the police in their work to do that. And what we've seen over the last week is actually attempts by the Home Secretary to undermine support for the police. That is really damaging and irresponsible, and it inflames situations like this.
I want to come back to her, but let me ask you something about your own party. This week, Parliament's going to debate a motion urging our government to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Will members of the Labour shadow cabinet be ordered to vote against such a motion?
So I think what you're referring to is the debates around the King's speech coming up this week. As I understand it, there are around 15 motions.
The motion that's likely to be introduced by the Scottish National Party MPs calling for a ceasefire.
And as I understand it, there are around 15 amendments that have been put down so far. There are likely to be more, so we don't yet know which ones the Speaker will select. We do obviously have a process which involves the Speaker selecting the amendments, and then the Labour Party will respond to those. So I'm not going to preempt that.
Yeah,
but I assume that you're talking that the wider issue that you're talking about, obviously, it is awful what is happening in the Middle East at the moment.
Yeah, so forgive me if I may
4,000 children killed in Gaza. We've got hostages who are still being held.
It is very likely that a motion will be put down calling on our government to support a ceasefire. Will members of the Labour shadow cabinet be whipped, ordered to vote against such a motion?
And I understand the question you're asking, but I'm not going to preempt the normal processes where we have got huge numbers of amendments down, and those will be selected by the Speaker, and at that time the Labour Party will respond. But Keir Starmer has set out the Labour Party's position in that important Chatham House speech, and obviously there is huge concern about events in the Middle East, and that's why we are urging the immediate suspension of hostilities, the humanitarian humanitarian pause that we have been calling for in order to be able to have proper both humanitarian aid go in, but also to try and get negotiations to get the hostages released and civilian protection in place, because it is devastating what is happening to the number of lives being lost.
OK, last point. When you next face Suella Braverman across the dispatch box, will you start by thanking her for distracting everybody from Labour's own internal divisions on Israel and Gaza?
Do you know, I think this is much more serious than that. Suella Braverman decided to launch an unprecedented attack on the impartiality of the police, and also to deliberately inflame tensions in the run-up to Remembrance Weekend. No Home Secretary has ever done that before. Her job is supposed to be to support the police and to work with the police, and also to calm community tensions. She did the opposite, and she did the opposite in a really damaging and irresponsible way. We warned her that her words would be exploited by extremists. We warned her that this would be damaging and irresponsible.
To resign.
And it was.
You obviously do regard it as serious.
I mean, she should not. Yeah, she's immensely serious. She should not have been doing this job in the first place. And Rishi Sunak let her, and he is too weak to do anything about it.
So should Suella Braverman resign?
It's really damaging what they're doing.
Should Suella Braverman resign? That's pretty straightforward.
I don't see how she can continue to do this job. She does not have the credibility or the authority to do the serious job of Home Secretary. How can she command the respect of the country around
she should resign.
The police? How can she command the respect of the police? Well, I think this is a matter for Rishi Sunak. I think he needs to deal with this, Trevor, actually. I think he appointed her and he needs to do something about this, because otherwise all that he shows is he is weak, he doesn't care about policing, and he doesn't care about the security of our country.
Yvette Cooper, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Trevor.